And I hope you guys are all comfortable in your spots, sitting in your chairs, and some of you, I guess, are standing. But I wanted to thank you for expressing your interest in neuroscience and how the brain works, your enthusiasm for the topic. It's a very interesting topic, and I appreciate very much your joining us. I invite you all to be comfortable, sit in your chairs, and stand, if you like, in the back. Feel the temperature of the room and the seats beneath you. Feel at ease and think about the people who are around you, sharing the interest and focus and energy in the conversation we're about to have. I invite you to listen to my voice and the words as they reach you. And I might invite you actually just to close your eyes for a moment, just as we get started, and I welcome you to the talk. Just close your eyes and listen to my voice and some of the ideas that I'm going to sketch out for you. And be at ease and think about the energy and focus you have on the topic that we're going to discuss. Feel your hands in your lap and feel the warm air around you. Feel the buzz of the other goings-on here at Maker Faire. And I invite you to give a sign of your enthusiasm for this discussion. In a simple way, just raise your right hand in the air. Put your right hand high in the air with your eyes closed and with your focus on my words, feeling the warmth of the room and the chairs beneath you. And notice actually as you are listening to my words and feeling that warmth with your hand in the air, that even your left hand also now is starting to rise, joining in with your right and expressing that same enthusiasm, expressing that feeling of focus and determination. And I thank you for that. So with both your hands still high in the air, please open your eyes and look around. How insane is that? That's totally insane. I mean, how many times have you had both hands in the air in a big room of people ever? Raise your hand if you have. We'll come back to that in a second, but I want to teach you some stuff about the brain to get going. This is Young Frankenstein, and basically everything I learned about the brain I learned from watching this movie. I have a few small caveats, but the big thing that I think is so important about the culture that we're part of here is we're a community of people that are working with open software, open hardware, and open ideas. And one of the powerful things about these systems is they let you take different pieces, fit them together, and reuse them and make amazing stuff. You might not realize that your brain has some of these same qualities. Some of the ideas that I think I can lay out for you, you can use, and I hope you will. And the first one is that your brain has parts. It looks like this. You may know that. The different parts do different things. You might know that. The maps they use nowadays look like this. And if you could see the small letters with those colored circles, you'd see a numbering configuration called the cranial map. When neuroscientists work with the brain, they have a fairly precise origination for every different function that they believe resides in that area. Fairly precise. Still the early days. That other picture was from 150 years ago. This one's from last year. And in those different regions, there's neurons. This is my bad drawing of neurons. I don't know if this resembles anything you've seen before, but these are a few neurons. And when you think a thought, neurons fire. You may know this. Your brain is an electrochemical system, and so those lightning bolts are electricity. That's electricity you're making. Those are ions moving around from the chemistry of your brain as you think thoughts. And as you think these thoughts, the connections between the neurons get bigger. Seems kind of natural. You go work out at the gym or you take a long walk, different parts of your body are exercised and your body changes. The same thing happens when you think thoughts. This, in fact, is plasticity and learning. This is what you heard about. This is why you sit in class and listen, and this is why you practice. And in fact, the more you do it, the brain areas change a lot. Did you notice what happened there? That red one sprung another leg. In fact, as neuroscientists look closely at different areas of the brain, they see the areas of the brain that you're practicing get bigger. Pianists have bigger fine motor control areas than ordinary people do. Folks who are blind have smaller visual cortexes than folks who are seeing. So now you know everything you pretty much need to know, and I'm going to give you a few hints on how you might hack the brain. My friend in the movie, he's a hardware hacker. So first, some ideas for hardware, and I wouldn't recommend you try these at home. Okay, so your brain has parts. Here's a diagram with a few of them. You see the blue and the red ones? That's the mapping for your motor control, your facial gestures and your hands, and they tie pretty directly, to the nerves that go right to those bits of your body. There's just a line that you can follow if you have the right tools and see it. Auditory cortex, you see the yellow stuff, hearing things, and the visual cortex is that green stuff in the back. Simple, not that much to understand. Input and output, both directions actually. So in some cases you're perceiving, and those areas are getting activated, and the more you perceive and the more you pay attention, those brain areas change, they get bigger. And if you use them to trigger and control behavior, same thing. Now check this out. When things are firing around the same time, let's say your auditory cortex and your visual cortex, they form associations too. The brain in network language is a small world network, and so you'll get these random, absurd connections between things that you didn't think were connected. They'll just form. And the more often they're associated, the connections will get reinforced. Those connections will get bigger and stronger, just like that picture I just showed you. It's kind of crazy. So if every time you practice piano, it's a warm day, or every time you study, the television's on, you'll start associating those things. It's part of why smoking is dangerous. Nicotine, of course, forms an addiction. But the other stuff, when you're smoking, you start getting addicted to that too, standing around outside your office. And the reverse happens. You're standing around outside your office, it makes you want to smoke. You have a beer and you're thinking, oh, I should be smoking. You should watch out. They fire together. It's something you can use, though, kids. There are moments when your parents are in amazingly good moods. You probably know about these moods. The problem is they don't happen necessarily when you want them to. These moods that your parents have, maybe you got a great score on a test, or they got some other thing that happened that's really boring to you, but you can tell they're in a wonderful mood. This is a fine time to create an anchoring association for those parents of yours. So I was thinking, what would be a non-annoying kind of association that you might do as a kid? And there's a really simple one. You can just give them a big hug, let's say. Your parents are happy, whatever happened. It might be something you did, might be something they did. And you just do something. Give your parents a big hug. Maybe you sing a song. There's something that you do. And you associate it with that positive outlook that your parent has on that occasion. Really overdo it. Don't tell them. I assume it's the parent who's not here today you're going to work on. But what you will find is the next time you unlock that anchoring association, you will create an echo of that feeling the parent had at that time. The harder you work on that anchoring, the better the dividends will be when you want to stay up late. Here's a hardware hack. It's a jumper cable, and neuroscientists have been doing this on animals and on human beings. That yellow line is a wire. It connects one part of the brain that we already know how it works to some other part. You just pick the part. It might be a piece of electronics. In the laboratory, neuroscientists are working with literally the same kind of electronics that you use in computing, but it might also be another part of the body. In certain occasions, they've taken nerves, moved them from the leg into the brain, and created connections between two unrelated parts of the brain. When you create that connection, you do what we were doing earlier a couple slides back when the auditory and visual cortex are connected. You're sending stimulation that's happening in your motor cortex to some other bit. Now, why would you do it? I don't know. But you can. It's kind of neat. I pose for you that question. Here's some neuroscientists who did do some work on this. They took some folks who were blind, and they took some folks who were seeing, and they gave them really high-resolution touch input. That's what that picture is supposed to be. After a certain amount of time, about half the folks that were blind reported seeing things. After a certain amount of stimulation to their hands, to their fine motor inputs, they started using their visual cognition cortex to process information that was naturally perceived in a visual way and reported seeing lights. That's freaking awesome. A name for that is synesthesia, actually. When you cross-wire different parts of your brain, you may have heard of folks that see numbers as colors or perceive music as feelings. You may be one of these people. Is anybody here like that? Raise 2 hands. it's kind of hard to get your head around what that might actually mean to have synesthesia since nobody here has it. And this is my example for you. I took my English language iPhone and I spoke to it in French. So I said the stuff on top, and out came the stuff on the bottom. Bonjour mes amis, je suis très heureux de parler avec vous aujourd'hui. And it said some crazy stuff on the bottom. Now that's obviously nonsense, it's not what we wanted. Fine. But if you could stick a beautiful picture and have it processed by your arithmetic cortex, where you process numbers, or let's say you're one of these people that sees numbers as colors, the way you do that cognition, like the CPU inside, would just be a different one than the one you ordinarily use. We'd probably have some unpredictable results. Some great mathematicians report that as the key to their insight, the ability to cross-wire and alternatively compute this stuff. It's super interesting. And so I got interested in it. And I started looking at a technology I had heard about a number of years ago about brain stimulation. And I went to Radio Shack, bought some stuff, put it all together, tried it out a few times, and then I did that. So I stuck it on my head. And this is a hardware hack that I don't recommend you try at home. You can read about it on the internet. But the field is called neuromodulation, broadly speaking. And a bunch of very serious medical devices and other technologies are being used that are quite invasive. But this crazy thing on my head is just a few very simple circuits creating a certain electromagnetic waveform I read about in some paper. And I somewhat foolishly stuck it on my head. There's quite a lot of literature about this kind of overclocking of certain brain areas. I showed you the picture, right? I mean, all those areas are awesome. They do amazing and interesting things. Every possible thing we do that we care about, we do with the cortex. There's all this cognition. There's other stuff too. What if you could enhance it, dial it up or dial it down? So I did this. And we replicated a result. In America, a lot of people have seen this problem. Have you seen this problem? It's called the 9-dot problem. Can you raise your hand if you've seen it? Keep your hand up. I won't hypnotize you. So a fair number of you have. Don't tell your neighbor. But this problem asks you to connect all those dots with a pencil. You draw 4 lines, but you can't pick up the pencil. It's kind of hard to draw 4 straight lines and connect all these dots. So there's a dude I was reading who invited 40 people in, screened them to make sure they hadn't seen this puzzle, gave half of them the puzzle with some crazy stuff on their head, but no particular effect. They tried to solve it, and 0 people solved it. In the other group, he did the same thing, but he applied a certain pattern of neurostimulation using some of the technologies I showed on the previous picture, and half of them solved it. So that's the 9-dot puzzle. What if it was climate, or cancer, or the stuff that we really are trying to solve? So that's stuff that people are working on. I was so excited by this that I started a company about it, and we've been working on it for the last couple of years, and I won't tell you about the company or about the answer to this problem. You're going to have to look it up later. But now I'm going to tell you the next thing you can do. So these are software hacks. The hardware stuff, you're not going to do it at home. You're not going to take a nerve out of your leg. But can anyone get, so this is a picture that's supposed to express a simple idea. I assume in a room like this, someone here might have a sense for what I'm doing. Any volunteers? Yeah, I got root. So I'm a super user on my own machine. I take control in all the other processes on my Mac. They do whatever the heck I say, even if there's rules against them. And I think there's a bunch of software things that are super cool that I hope some folks here will remember and fool around with, kind of the way that Tim has been experimenting, and invent something amazing. So here's plain old learning. Piano player, you move your fingers a whole bunch. That part of your brain with the fine motor control gets bigger. Told you about that. Seems simple. When you're sitting in class, for the quarter of your life you spend educated, plain old learning is what happens. It actually works, and it is super worthwhile. I mean, imagine life before literacy. The brain that we have now is so massively different than brains before literacy. You can hardly imagine. I mean, it's like your physical brain is different. So here's a hack. Tape your fingers together. If you tape a few fingers together and you start fooling around, what you'll find is that the sensory data that's flowing to your brain is radically diminished. The part of your brain that's expecting a pointer and a middle finger is not getting anything. It starts atrophying immediately. It's like being blind. Now, you might think this is a horrible thing, but still, it's kind of cool. And it happens in like 5 minutes. Seriously, just go home and try it. You will see. It's like having a dead leg almost. There's a dude who tried this, I am told. This dude. Sat under a tree for 40 days and 40 nights, right? The Buddha. And he, now we call it mindfulness or meditation. And I guess he sat there and he deprived himself of all sensory stimulus and focused inward for a really, really long time. It is not beyond the pale of imagination that this is a real dude. I mean, it can't be that hard. I'm sure Tim has done it. This friggin' changed his brain, and it would change yours. It absolutely would. The neuroscience on this is not like mainstream, but no one would doubt the bits that I gave you up till this point. There's something that you can do, brain exercises that you can do, that can have that kind of radical transformation. And this is a mainstream one. Tons of people are doing it, and they say that they have ecstatic and extraordinary experiences by way of this type of practice. There's some other thing you can do to learn French faster that I hope you'll email me about. Still working on my French. Here's another thing that happens. So here's the case of a blindfold. So you put the blindfold on somebody, and their occipital cortex, the vision system, starts to atrophy right away. If you put it on for a really long time, it gets smaller, loses some capability. But I told you about that small world effect, right? You've got these tentacles shooting out around in your brain. Your fine motor control, or maybe some other area that you're practicing very intently on, will take that opportunity to colonize your occipital cortex and start using it. More horsepower. Like the piano guy that adds more capability for the fine motor control, you can similarly tape your hands together and free up cycles for other parts of your mind that you're trying to focus on or build up some capability on. If you were trying to develop perfect pitch, it might be a good idea to blindfold yourself, maybe for a little while. So that thing at the beginning when everyone's hands were up, that was hypnosis. You're not zombies, but you were listening to my words. You were following them closely. I said a few things you believed to be true, and after a bit, you let those words just be your thoughts. You're like, yeah, I'm sitting here. I'm really excited. This is so great. It's kind of hot in here. I'm sitting on a chair. I assume these are all true statements in your own mind if you had said them, but I said them. And at some point, I'm like, hey, do me the favor of raising your hand. So you did. But I never told you to raise your other hand. All I said was, now you feel your left hand also rising up. And people's hands shot up like crazy. Your eyes were closed. I assume someone was watching. There was one skeptic back there. I saw him. It was pretty amazing. I've never done that before. I just read about it. I'm totally amazed. I hope there were photographs. Hypnosis seems like a crackerjack kind of peripheral thing, but there is clearly some kind of effect that you're able to create, and it uses stuff that has very clear cognitive bases. When you think in words. A lot of your cognition is this linguistic stuff. As language starts blending with your own thoughts, at some point the power of that suggestion takes you places. So parents, hack your kids. When you came and sat down and I was introduced and the lights were low and the room was quiet, you were in a different state of consciousness than you ordinarily are in. Walking down the street, talking to your friends, doing your work, exercising, these are all somewhat different states of consciousness. The hypnosis people talk about trances. Here are two trances you've definitely had. The first one is in an elevator. You get in an elevator and you shut down. I do. I don't keep talking loudly and moving around. I respect the space of others and sit quietly for 10 seconds, 15. I mean, do other people do this in the elevator? Here's another one, a long drive. You guys out here drive a lot. In New York, I don't get to do it. Oftentimes, an hour or 2 hours will pass, and you can't remember in detail the experiences you've had for 2 hours on the highway. You can't remember every highway exit that you passed or every gas station you might have gone through. Your perception is accelerated. We enter trances often. So parents use this because your kids do it too when they're watching television and playing video games. It's an opportunity to add on a layer of this cognitive framing. The stuff you say is heard and it is processed. They might not respond. They're sitting in the car on a long journey in the middle of their video game. So use it for good. Okay, here's the last one, and this one's a puzzle for you guys to help me with, and I'm glad Stuart's over here. I took 5 minutes with Stuart before we started. I asked him like 15, 20 questions. Not terribly hard questions, but they're part of a very detailed script. And he answered yes, no, all these things about his personality. What does he like doing? Does he order wine? Does he go to Chinese food? Whatever. And then, Stuart, tell me if you recognize this. Is that too small for people to read? You have a great need for other people to like and admire you. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. You have a great deal. And so I told Stuart, I showed that to him on my phone, and I said my computer program had generated that based on a bunch of my questions. And Stuart, I asked you, you have the mic there, right?
I do.
Yeah, give it a rating from 0 to 5. How accurate is that about you?
I rated it 4.5.
I mean, that's crazy. This is where I got that paragraph from. So somebody figure that out. Go forth and multiply.
Thank you very much. If you want to keep talking to Amol.